reaching rock bottom and being like, Emily, like, would you help me? Because like, I'm never a person to ask for help. I mean, ever.
Things like Lyme disease and infections, heavy metals, like those things are also passed in utero. We know that adrenal health, if mom's adrenals are shot, baby's adrenals are going to come out shot.
Welcome to Under the Sun podcast. I'm Ilea.
And I'm Emily. Grab a cup of coffee and join us every other Wednesday as we discuss all things holistic health, faith, relationships, going against the grain, and really everything under the sun.
Let's get started, and thanks for being here.
We have coffee.
The best.
It is the best.
It's like, I'm pretty sure the first day we got like our coffee shipment and I was like, oh, like I like swear I like drank a cup and my nervous system immediately just was like, calm down, right? And Alex looks at me, he's like, you might have a problem.
Alex is her son, in case you didn't know that. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because Organo accidentally shipped it to our friend's house. So like they have an auto ship and we have an auto ship. And for some reason they switched the population and shipped it to his house. And luckily he was honest and it was like, hey, your shipment is here. And he was like, hey, I can bring it by like this afternoon or tonight. And I was like, I can drive by right now. Like I can come get it right now. He was like, okay, calm down. I can come drop it off at your house. Like just relax. And I was like, okay.
You don't understand.
Yeah. I just like stopped drinking coffee because it wasn't worth it to me. It wasn't good. It wasn't good.
No. And that's probably part of the reason like my nervous system was like, was because like I had drank regular coffee and I was like, oh, I feel terrible.
Yeah.
And like immediately you just get that like the shakes almost.
Yeah. And it boosts my anxiety. Like,
yeah.
And I just find myself being more anxious, and we don't need to add any more of that than we need, you know?
Absolutely. Heidi, you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. So I feel like this is a good sized topic today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She girthy, just like me.
Yeah. Yep. So today we're going to talk about preconception and preconception healthcare. And if you are in a position of wanting to get pregnant at some point in your life, this conversation is for you. And then also throwing in some of those tidbits of what do you do if you've already had that, you know? And so Ilea and I are talking, our story is very different in the sense that I had no idea of any sort of the whole idea of preconception, healthcare. And, you know, I was on multiple medications, and got pregnant and was just young and sick and all the things.
But you didn't know.
No. Yeah.
Like, no, a doctor should have been educating you on those things. But there was, or somebody.
Right. And I think, again, I think we've talked about this, but going back to that generational idea, you know, it seems as though in other cultures, still today, but definitely past cultures, the idea that so much of this information about women's health would have come from grandma and great grandma and just being passed down.
Aunts and cousins.
And so you would have, you know, it's why a lot of cultures would do these, you know, massive cleanses, and still some do, you know, before you get married, because it's like, well, you're going to get married and have kids. So you have to go through this.
Some religions
you know.
still do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's just interesting. Yeah. But I feel like unknowingly, we're talking like almost unknowingly, like you went through that process. So tell us a little bit about.
Well, I think in general, it just started with not feeling good. And I was like, I just don't feel good. And I remember Dave and I having like conversations of, you know, the future of, you know, what's our 1 year, 5 year, 10-year plan. And, you know, when like the 2 year conversation kind of happened of like, oh, maybe that's when we start to like, we try to like have a kid. And the sheer panic filled my body. Cause I was like, I can't even take care of myself. Like, I can't wake up on time. I can't, like, I have no energy to do anything. I can't, like, I don't know how I would, for one thing, get pregnant. Cause I think my body just couldn't handle it, exhaustion wise. I was like, but then also like postpartum, I was like, how could I care for a baby if I'm like already like really just depressed and stressed and exhausted? So I started working with you just to get feeling better in general. And then I remember in like September of 2020, I think, remember we were in the sunroom and I was like, hey, like I'm feeling great. I like, we're on track. Like I feel so much better. Life has flowers in it again. It's great. And I was like, I want to get pregnant next year. And that's kind of when like the conversation even started. And I don't know where I heard it. I never heard it from anybody saying like, hey, before you get pregnant, maybe like prep your body a little bit. But it just kind of like came as maybe I heard it through the grapevine of like just detoxing the pill and things through life to just ready your body. And Dave did a little bit of detox, but he's kind of hard to participate sometimes. But like it makes me also more confident when I was able to get pregnant, like very quickly, I knew it was because I did the hard work for basically the 2 years prior, and I didn't have to go off in that like, oh, I'll just have sex whenever and hope for the best and just live with that question mark.
Yeah. How do you feel like going through that kind of that health journey, if you will? I feel like there's probably a better word for it, but I'm drawing a blank on it. But how do you feel like that has transitioned into how you feel with pregnancy and even just moving forward? Like, has it changed your perspective at all? Do you feel like it would be the same regardless?
It makes me think, I don't know if this is quite the answer, but you know how like you and I have talked about how people just they're not aware of their body anymore.
Yeah.
I feel like I've always been very aware of my body, but when you don't feel well, it's hard to like really pinpoint which part hurts the most and which part is like, you're just all inflamed and like blah. So getting like hold of the reins to where you're actually like back in tune with your body. That way when you, and you actually like can be like, oh, yep, I ate this thing. And like, that was my fault, instead of just, kind of flying by the seat of your pants, being able to take the reins. And then when I did get pregnant, I feel like I want to say this right. I feel like I could relax in that, like, I did what I could to make sure that like, I didn't know that you had like a toxin dump, like with your first kid. Like, well, I did detoxes and did the best I could with the knowledge that I had. And I'm like, the rest is up to God. And my body has done, I mean, the female body is incredible. Like, even if you don't detox before, like just creating a human is
absolutely
divine. But I feel like I have such an advantage because I feel like I have a decent amount of energy. It depends on the day, it depends on the growth spurt, but I'm just more aware of my body, and which makes me aware of her body. And then I'm like, well, because I learned all these things beforehand and took the initiative and took these steps, that means like I'll be able to teach her for her life to be like, oh, you ate those eggs and they don't make you feel good. Maybe we should, see why that is. And I'm not sure if that answered it, but that's my
absolutely. I was
final
thinking
answer.
Through dun dun dun. I was thinking, how does that translate when we're like, oh, we feel sick, we're tired, we don't feel well, and then we get pregnant? Would you have chalked up some of those things? It's like, well, it's just everybody does this. It's pregnancy. Yeah. Versus you doing work beforehand from an emotional, mental perspective of not settling for what everyone else was settling for. Yeah. I don't know if you felt that changed that perspective at all. Do you feel like you're advocating or educated more than you would have been if you hadn't gone through that?
So,
you're just like, I feel like you also just kind of jump into some of this anyway. Like,
but I never used to be that way. Okay. I think it was out of desperation is why I started geeking out about these things. Cause I was like before I hired you and was like, just tell me what to take. I can't
think.
I can't think. And also like, you read one book and then you're like, okay, I'm going to do what this book says. And then you're just like, okay, it works for a little while. And then you stall and you're like, okay, well, I'm back to feeling like crap. And then you read this blog post and you're like, okay, I'm going to do this. And then you're gathering information, and knowledge is always power, but sometimes you just need like a helping hand to be like, hey, I can see what's going on. Sometimes you just need someone to call you out and be like, this is what you need to do.
And maybe it's a little bit of a tangent, but I think that's a good point. And when people say to me all the time, like, well, when my kid's diet gets better, we'll come work with you.
Yeah.
When this gets better. And the idea is like, depending on the bandwidth or the understanding, if you're so tired that you can't even hardly think, like how much more difficult is it going to be for you to like mentally know what you're eating and not eating and what's like, how do you pay attention?
Or
so
there's a comedian, and he's like gone through some rough patches in the media these days. But there's a comedian called John Mulaney, and he has a skit that Dave and I like listened to back in the day on our way to Yellowstone to backpack, and he's freaking funny in this particular skit. Again, I can't condone anything that's happening right now, but he's like, before I had a girlfriend, I had no standards for how I should be treated.
Yes.
She'd be like, the waiter shouldn't talk to you that way. And then he's like, no, she shouldn't. And then it's like, you're, the bus driver shouldn't, blah, 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 whatever. Like basically like I had no standards. Mm-hmm. If you don't have standards for yourself before you have a baby, like all of your attention, all of your bandwidth is going to be towards that baby because it's a blob and it can't do anything for itself. And you love it so much and you're going to want to do the best for it, but you're going to take the back burner. And sometimes like truly, I think it was so beneficial, not only just health wise, but like I also worked through a lot of like, spiritual stuff that, I mean, there's always more to go through, but some spiritual stuff that I'm like, I don't want to pass this on and continue this cycle.
Yeah.
Or like emotional stuff. Like, I'm like, I don't want to pass this on. I want to deal with this now and do the hard stuff and hopefully, mitigate some of the emotions that are transferred through. But there's also this, there's like, we need to like make up a different word for empowered.
Yeah.
I gathered strength from, reaching rock bottom and being like, Emily, like, would you help me? Cause like, I'm never a person to ask for help. I mean, ever. And like to be like, Emily, will you give me a hand up and help me to feel better? Was like a lesson in itself to like be a future mom because someday, like, when there's a little kid, I now know that like, okay, I'm not feeling good. I can reach out to Emily and be like, please take all my money and just tell me what to take so that I feel, well. But there's like this certain standard you have to have for yourself before you, not before, it doesn't have to be before, but if you can choose, be like, I choose that I'm going to prioritize myself for 6 months to a year to prepare my body so that for generations, it's going to live on emotionally, physically, mentally. I'm going tangents, but it makes me like sweat. That's something with like,
she's getting really like fired up.
When I get, I don't know why, but something extra with pregnancy, when I get like passionate about like you have to prioritize yourself a little. Like you don't want to be selfish and like those people who get like obsessed with self-care. And it's like, if I don't get my self-care, I am going to explode. It's like, okay, well, relax.
That's another thing we need to redefine is self-care because it could very much be
self-absorbed.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. And then there's just like understanding that your bandwidth and your
cup is empty.
Right.
Yeah. There's a middle ground of like, you can take care of yourself and show your kids like, it's okay for your kids to see you taking care of yourself. Like you don't always have to be the martyr and like mom's always like, disheveled and exhausted. It's like they need to see you thrive too. So they can know like you're the adult in the situation. You're their example that like, you're the number one example that they're going to go into their life and be like, well, this is how mom did it. And whether they consciously recognize it or not, if you're always like, if you never prioritize yourself, then they're going to go into that habit as well.
Yeah. But that's just being good stewards. Like there's different.
There's a middle ground of.
Yeah. And when it's not an idol, right? Like it's like, no, this is just the same as brushing my teeth. It's the same as, going to bed and drinking water and movement. And it's when it becomes an idol where it's like, I can only rest and feel joy when I'm by myself with a mask on my face or getting my nails done, whatever. Like that type of self-care just is empty.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it teaches outside of like nuclear family. Like it's just edifies this idea that like you have to be on your own, you know, versus, and I know this is like off topic, but like versus, you know, sometimes when my cup feels empty, like me saying to my kids, like, Mom is coming from an empty cup today. Like, I need you to pour in. Can you stop and can you pray for me? Like, I know you're 9, but like that can help fill my cup, you know.
Also
versus
teaches them to
leaning on
not
each
just be
other.
thinking about themselves and be like, oh,
Yeah.
Mom needs something. Like, I can help Mom.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It creates community.
Yeah.
Instead of.
Also, but what that also does, bringing it back around, so you have a daughter, Kate. How old is she?
She's 9,
9.
almost 10. Yeah.
So
She'll be 10.
So
I think,
if
when
you're
this
like,
airs.
Kate, Mom's cup is empty, will you pray for me? You're also teaching her, maybe inadvertently, maybe like, maybe she's self-aware, but to be like, oh, like I can kind of, like, what does she mean when her cup is empty? And even a 9-year-old has those days where they're flat and they don't feel right. And she'll be able to recognize, and instead of like lashing out in anger or emotions, you know, as an adult, she might be able to like remember that and be like, okay, Mom, my cup is empty. Can you just talk to me on the phone for 10 minutes before I go back into work? Like, you know, like I mean, that's all really the end game, isn't it? Like preconception, pregnancy, raising a healthy family and kids. And like, that's what you want, is to be
absolutely
the best steward.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. Okay. So we're going to jump in a little bit into some statistics, or not statistics. Some
Specifics,
not some statistics. Yeah. Like where, you know, statistics can be super helpful. But what are some specifics that you can do? And while I primarily work with children, I worked for years with adults and children. But I worked, you know, for a long time with a mixture of both. So I do have some knowledge there. It's not necessarily that I'm overly passionate about it. At the same time, I am passionate about healthy families and healthy kids. And so in order to be passionate about healthy kids, you have to, you know, go higher up on the food chain. Like, where are they coming from? You know, I don't go through any new client process with anyone without diving into what was Mom's health during pregnancy, what was birth like, what was all like, because that is a factor when we're looking at our kids. So first thing we're going to talk about in terms of preconception healthcare is like, what can we do as the female
because we're in charge of the process.
Right. Yeah. And there is also something that is vastly important for, you know, our husbands to do. Like it is not only, your egg is not the only part of this process. So one of the things I'm super passionate about is autism. And so the beautiful thing of autism is, as it has grown and increased, and it's not just increased in popularity, it's increased in, you know, statistically they're saying like, you know, I believe by 32 or 36, you know, every single
2036.
Yeah. Every single child born will have neurological issues. And this idea, like, what do you do with a society who is neurologically not independent and has, you know, dysfunction? And so when you start seeing this rise, I mean, really that, you know, 80s and 90s, and then even more in the last, I mean, it's crazy. Like, I don't know about you, but when I was little, I only knew one kid who was autistic, and he was like 10 years younger than me. Or now it's like 1 in 4 boys, or at least on the spectrum. And you could argue the spectrum's just gotten bigger. But the beautiful thing with autism is the fact that as it increases, you have these think tanks that are sitting there and going, why is this increasing? And a lot of study has been done on preconception and pregnancy in order to understand, is there a correlation? So I think you can go off what is the most, you know, the canary in the coal mine. What is the most unhealthy? I don't know if unhealthy is the right word, but the most, I don't know if as a mom, that's a very scary word, like your child has autism, and there's degrees of that. Cancer, autism, like those are some pretty big, like your child
And
has
all of those
this.
things are on the rise. Like
Absolutely.
And maybe it's just because it's more prevalent on social media, but I'm like, why are these babies like 3 months old coming out and they're like, oh, your baby has brain cancer.
Yeah.
It's like, it's
Yeah.
brand new. How
Yeah.
does this happen?
Right. And that's, that idea that we come out of the womb clean with a clean slate. And that's not true. That's not true. So as a mom, what can you do before? So a couple of the things that have been very, very prevalent in children with health issues down the road. Well, a big one is vitamin D levels, so I think every mom or woman who would like to get pregnant to be able to have your blood work done, again, we're a society that we only take action in terms of like getting a full blood panel and then having a functional practitioner read it and then walk you through creating balance where there has been imbalance. So vitamin D is one of those, huge things that very, very rare. I'm not sure if there's been like just a small handful of people who actually fit into that normal functional range of like having really good optimal vitamin D. And vitamin D is so crucial to the structure of a child in utero. So if mom's vitamin D is significantly decreased, and there's a lot of studies and statistics that are like, oh yeah, autism, autoimmune, all these things like that is linked with low vitamin D. These children are coming into the world without vitamin D. And so how does your brain form well in the body if you don't have adequate levels of vitamin D? So blood work is huge. I think having blood work and then having it read functionally, because
That's key though.
Yes.
Because I don't know how many times I've gotten blood work. Truly, I don't even know what they ran. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, my blood was taken and then the report was, oh, everything is within range.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, well, you need somebody who's, somebody like you to read it and actually be like, okay, at your age or whatever specific things you look at to actually guide them on their way instead of just being like, well, you're in range. You, 22-year-old woman, are in the same range as a 52-year-old man. Like, it doesn't make sense. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I think blood work gets a bad rap because people don't know how to read it, and so a lot of functional practitioners who are really well trained at understanding blood work is not only are they looking at let's take those ranges and say what is truly optimal for the body versus what is normal. And then they're looking at what are these common patterns. So when this is high and this is low, or this is a little bit out of range, or that's like, when we put them all together, what does it look like? And then add that to your signs and symptoms. Because some people say, well, blood work is, it's can be disheartening if you feel great and then your blood work's a mess. It's like, yeah, but how do you fix what's the first, rule of it, is it AA or whatever? Like, where it's like, you have to admit there's a problem first. Like, you can't fix it if you don't admit there's a problem. So looking at that is huge because you have to know where are those levels. Like, how many women do not have a clue what their levels are, and then they get pregnant, and then they go in, and now all of a sudden doctors, like, I've worked with several women who they're like, oh, every time I'm pregnant, my blood sugar's terrible and my vitamin D is like 0 and I have no iron in my body. And then those are the same people who get pregnant, like post baby. They have no idea. They have no idea if anything changed.
Well, that's why, I don't know.
She's getting sweaty again.
I'm getting sweaty because I'm trying to watch my verbiage. It's important to find, I don't like the term care provider, but like find an advocate in like the holistic world, because they're not just going to be like, here's this blanket thing, a diagnosis, whatever. Like, whereas doctors are just gonna be like, oh, here's, here's your birth control, you're good to go. Whereas like a functional medicine doctor or a NTP, somebody's gonna kind of equip you to like, hey, here's the information. Now you have to follow through for you.
Yeah.
And if you learn that before you get pregnant, I hate the term empower, but it'll empower you that when you are pregnant to research like, oh, this test that they've been doing for years is actually wildly inaccurate and I can refuse it. I can say, no, I don't want it. Thank you though. And you don't have to have an explanation because it's your body and you have bodily autonomy. And that's why it's so good to learn those boundaries before going in, because otherwise pregnancy can be scary of like, oh yeah, just tell me what to do to make my baby healthy. It's like, well, it's all about you. Like it is your decision to make that baby healthy. It's
and what if you're not healthy?
Yeah.
So how do you make a healthy child from a mother who's not healthy?
Who won't take authority over her own well-being.
Yes.
It's like,
and I'll tell you what, like when you've done enemas and you've done all the parasite cleanses and you've
done them.
Yeah. And you've done all the emotional work and you've done like these really intense protocols that cost money and time. I just see those women go into pregnancy with like, I'm not going to settle for anything. Like I've put way too much time and money into this to just.
Well, you also value yourself a little more because you're like, oh, like for me, it was like, I've done the doctor route. I've tried doing the whole like, oh, like you're supposed to get like a yearly checkup and all the things. And it never proved of value. I always left feeling worse than I got there, like emotionally, like it was a lot of fear wrapped up in it. And it's like, if you can get that, okay, yeah, what they say isn't always Bible. Like you are in charge of you and nobody loves you or nobody loves your baby like you love your baby. So if you can kind of take the reins of advocating for yourself and your health and finding the right support team. I like the term support more than like care provider because it's like you don't care for me. You're just like You're being paid to talk to me. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. So, anyways,
and that puts them in a position.
Makes me sweaty.
And I think that puts the mom in a position of like, I think honestly, and this is going to be one of those like, I don't know, people may shut us off, but
I don't care.
We are a generation of very, very weak parents. Like we kind of take the easy way out of a lot of things and we are wimps. And so often lazy. 100%.
Because you don't research yourself. You're just like, oh, the doctor told me I had to do this.
Right. Well, and I think that is somewhat like, we don't want it to have to be our fault. Right. So like
ouch.
I mean,
it's true, but ouch. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I said someone's going to shut it off. They're going to be like, no.
Well, if they're, okay, then my challenge is, and this is something I had to learn, if it offends you, it affects you. Like, if it causes you an emotional reaction, that means there's something there you need to dive into. It'll be like, okay, if she's calling me a lazy parent because I just listen to what, the school board says, if I listen to what this doctor says or the nurses say, that I'm lazy or I don't do my own research. It's like, well, are you offended because it's the truth?
Right.
Dig into that.
Yeah. And this idea that like, we don't want, if it's someone else's fault, then that's their fault. How dare they? We don't take any personal responsibility.
We'll
We don't. And so I think that's when you start to take ownership and responsibility over your own health, you are much quicker to take it over your kids.
Yeah. And
and
but it's been conditioning over a couple of generations of like, oh, we just go to the doctor when you have the sniffles. And it's like, well, no, actually you just, let the kid
and I
run
honestly
its course.
think that like so many moms that I have the privilege of doing life with, regardless of whether it's professional or just personal, they really do love their kids and want the best for them. But they just don't even, like, I think we don't even realize how much we just trade in parental responsibility, because the reality is we don't want to mess up.
Yeah.
Like, and that is a problem, you know? And so if we can learn to get blood work, to fight for a practitioner, I can't tell you how many clients I'll have, and they will come in and they'll be kids, and they will come in with massive amount of testing that has been done. And I say, what did a practitioner, like, you've been through 4 practitioners and your child's 4. Like, what did they do? Like, I'm literally seeing red flags everywhere. What have they done? And they're like, nothing. What? Like, but this idea that 90% of the time, those moms have not taken care of themselves either. And so they don't know how to advocate.
And that's how their care has gone too. It's like,
100%. Yeah.
okay, this is just, is how our family is. It must be genetics.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think that by doing blood work, by really coming in and taking ownership over your life.
Would that be step 1? Is that what you're saying? Is like,
I think from a body perspective, like, yes, like leaning into understanding that like things like Lyme disease and infections, heavy metals, like those things are also passed in utero. And so when we know that that is passed, when we know that our gut bacteria, if our child significantly depends on mom's gut bacteria, we know that adrenal health, if mom's adrenals are shot, baby's adrenals are going to come out shot, right? And their vitamin D levels affect our kids' vitamin D levels. Like, these kids are coming out with illnesses because they didn't have the ability to fight and like in the body, right? Yeah. And then there's that toxic dump from the firstborn. So if we want to, like, from a body perspective, like, you got part of your preconception is diving into making sure that you have created the most balance that you can, you know, and then the next thing would be that environment. There is so many studies that show that depending on where your Wi-Fi is, if you slept with a Wi-Fi router in your bedroom specifically while you were pregnant, your chances of having a child with autism by the age of 2, that doesn't mean they come out neurologically dysfunctioned, but by the time they're 2, they will show signs of autism. I mean, it's almost 100%. And so there are certain countries, right? Like Russia and Ukraine and Iran. There may be more because some of these are older studies that I have found, but like, they're so smart about this that like it's almost a law. Like, they're very intentional about preconception. They're very intentional about no Wi-Fi in preschools and younger elementary schools. Like, they're because they know, I mean, to the point where I've heard quotes of other countries that are a little competitive with the United States saying, we're just going to let the United States EMF themselves to death. And then we'll just wait. Like, our kids will be smarter and better because we have forced preconception health and healthcare, and it's almost required. Like, they can come in and tell you to move. I don't know if this old study, I don't know if this is still the case because it was 2014.
And we'll link it below in the show notes or in the YouTube description.
Yeah. But they, you know, we're talking that like, oh no, like, they'll come in and like test your house. And if it's too high in EMFs, like, you have to leave. But again, like, that's so far off our radar. So to understand that all the sonograms and all the Wi-Fi and all the...
Don't get me started on sonograms.
Yeah. But like, all of that, right? So before we even conceive, walking through the process of, and it's resiliency. I mean, we live in a world, you can't get rid of every toxin. You can't get rid of all EMFs. I mean, even now, like, we're sitting, you know, we're using technology to even do this. It's about resiliency because the understanding the electrical aspect of the body, and if it needs more electricity, the most simple way to say it is it's going to look for electricity. And if man-made electromagnetic fields are close to that, it's going to grab onto that, and that's going to affect you. That people with higher electrical voltage of the body aren't as affected negatively by EMFs. So those are just things, right? Like, looking at our environments, looking at the body to make sure it's balanced.
And none of this is to instill fear of, like, you know, of people who are already done having kids or like, oh, I was planning to get pregnant like next month, or, we've been trying for a while. Do I stop? Like, it's not here to instill fear. It's just like, hey, you don't know until you know. So
absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's the beauty of like our stories, and you can go back and listen to mine specifically. And so I think it's fun that Eileen and I have different perspectives on this. We laugh because as we were talking about, I think we had mentioned this previously, but as we were talking about this season and everything we were going to talk about, I was laughing. So I'm like, I did it. Like my children are like, oh, you did everything. And I don't have fear or shame at all over it, because I know that I get to sit and talk about it now, because how it did affect my kids. So there is always hope. There is never, but I now get the privilege to, like we said, like walk my daughter through that, walk my son through that. When my son has, wants to take like an iPad or something and put it on his lap, I'm like swatting it down. I'm like, my grandbabies will be healthy. You are not putting that on there. Get it off.
I do that to Dave all the time. I'm like, don't ruin your sperm. Like,
yes. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, do you want to hear a really awkward story?
Sure. Why not?
I'll tell you maybe off camera. But Dave does, he'll put sometimes his phone in the front pocket, and I'm like, get that out of there. Like, no. And now he just doesn't. But I'm like, still that damage is probably there from years of him doing that. And lots of people do that constantly. Yeah. And I sometimes still put it in my butt pocket, and I'm like, yeah, well, and Dave, I should find the article. Dave Asprey, the guy, the bulletproof guy, did a test on his leg, because he's always kept his phone in his like front left pocket or whatever. And once he started learning about EMFs, he was like, I'm curious what it's done to my bone density. And so he did an x-ray of his left, like thigh muscle or thigh bone versus his right, I guess femur is what it's called. But, and it was 30% less strength, like 30% more decay just from the phone sitting there. And it was a perfect size of the phone. It wasn't like it radiated down to his knee. It was like, it was the perfect size of.
Yeah. Yeah. And you think, what would that do over a long period of time? It would eventually grow,
Grow.
Like that spot would eventually
it'd probably
grow.
end up probably being cancer eventually.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Anyways.
It's crazy. But yeah. And so that kind of segues into the next point. If husbands are willing, because sometimes they're just not, and that's okay, right? There's so much grace here. But like we've said, women are born, like we're born with the eggs that we have. Men, on the other hand, have an opportunity to make much healthier. Like they actually have, when it comes to preconception, I think they have an even higher. And someone might argue that this is inaccurate, but I think that they almost seem like they have a higher ability to change things around, because they can get healthy and that sperm gets healthy. And,
I'll have to like link an article, but when we were talking about conceiving, women's eggs, and correct me if you know the specific timeline, I should have looked at this before, but women's eggs, like you can improve egg quality, but you can never like reverse damage, but you can improve the egg quality and like stickiness and stuff. But the sperm, you can do like every once a month, it could basically like have brand new sperm. Like it's from a 17-year-old, like young and spry kid. It's like brand new sperm versus women's eggs. It's just, you can make them stronger, but you can't really reverse much damage.
Yeah. Which is something we'll get into when we talk about infertility. But, it is interesting to me how much infertility is actually on the men, but we just aren't testing it and we're not looking at it accurately. And, zinc, for instance, zinc is significantly decreased in a lot of men, and you need proper zinc levels for a good sperm count. And so like, what a simple thing to really, so a lot of people who specialize in preconception and, I guess preconception healthcare, like they won't just take the female. Like you have to do both. You have to do husband and wife, because of the fact that they do play a part. Now I think the beautiful thing is, as women, we can continue to add nutrients throughout the pregnancy, and we can still do more work. And so that part, it's not like, oh, you're set
Like the guys have like the one chance. Like,
Right.
you got your 10 minutes and then you're.
Absolutely. And again, the EMF, that's another big thing. Like those, they've been able to prove like that it fries your sperm, And so for those who have little boys, like making sure that they aren't putting an iPad on their lap and things like that are huge. Obviously, like the gut bacteria and stuff can die off with EMFs, but also, trying to protect them so that they can have healthy babies when they're older too. So,
Yeah, because it also, if you get healthy as a mom, and like, for instance, like right now I'm carrying a little girl and she has all the eggs she'll have in her whole life. Mind you, there's always more that you can do to get healthy. Like, did I eat 100% organic? No. But like, there's always more you can do. But also I know I've done a lot so that I can set her up for like a better, existence. And then we have like her whole childhood and stuff to, make her body even more, just optimal, I guess.
Yeah.
And then she'll have me as a mom, very opinionated about these things, whether that's a positive or a negative. But she'll know, like she'll know about her cycle and she'll know about these things and she'll be able to then change the trajectory for her kids. And like, it's,
Yeah. And so that kind of segues into a little bit of the next point I was wanting to make when it comes to preconception. And excuse me, that would be like, we've talked about dressing the body in a lot of ways and the environment and what that looks like. But there's also that spiritual side, that emotional side that is also super important. So whether it's preconception, pregnancy, or any time throughout your life, it is important to lean into this. And because I think what you were saying in that idea is like, you're changing how your family goes forward as much as you can do that. And that's huge, like generational blessings and I don't know, I guess you could say blessings and curses, honestly.
Yeah.
They go with you, both generations, the ones that have gone past and the ones that we're going forward. And so what else can we do from a preconception perspective? And that is walking through some of the hard work from that spiritual level. They were talking at church the other day about starting with Jonathan Edwards and then up to 5 generations post Jonathan Edwards. And then another like criminal, who they had changed his name for protective reasons. And then, it was an article that the pastor was reading and then, did 5 generations past him. And like, what did it look like? Was it just like a snippet of time, or how did that affect generations past? And Jonathan Edwards, like, they talked a little bit about his life and how he would just pray over his kids every night. He had like 10 or 11 kids. And regardless of where he was at, he always like made it home to pray a blessing over each of his kids. And then looking at the generations that came after him and all the pastors and all the military and all the missionaries and, people in such authority, even like a vice president of the United States, all these things seemed like there was just such a blessing that was carried generationally. And then you had, kind of the, they didn't say what he did, but I don't know, whatever he did that was not good, whatever, acts of violence he did, and then followed that. And like the amount of people that were imprisoned in his, generational line, and the amount of prostitutes and the amount of people addicted to substance, abuse and all these different things. And just that reminder that like what we do does affect multiple generations, whether we realize it or not. So when we come in and we break chains off and we, again, can get healthy in that. I thought it was really interesting. I came across a study from Ohio University, and they were talking about marital fights, and they actually like were testing blood serum, like while the therapist, was almost trying to provoke fights in the couple. And, they were interested to find that like women and their cortisol levels and like the serum levels change so fast, so much more quickly than the men's did, which probably doesn't surprise most of us. But if you're carrying that baby, what does that look like when we haven't done some of that emotional work beforehand? Are we passing on some of that like quick response and that cortisol drive, and your blood sugar affects so much, and adrenals and all that stuff? So if we can sit and really, you know, and again, it kind of goes back to that fear, that anxiety, like being able to get freedom in so much of that is going to affect the way your child is and affect how well your pregnancy is. Because you get to walk in, you know, laughter and joy actually improves your immune system. So when we can do some of that and we can take our thoughts captive and we can think on things that are praiseworthy before we ever get to the point where we're pregnant, then even in that moment of being like, I am super, super sick, instead of complaining that we're sick, we've already learned to be like, thank you, Jesus, that I am sick right now, because that means that baby is growing inside me, and what a gift that is, right? And we get to speak blessing and praise over our kids instead of being like, look what you did to my body. You know, look what you, like, I was so sick, I was miserable, like I couldn't get that job because I was pregnant, you know, or my hair fell out, you know, all these things. Instead, we've already been broken and freed from some of those word curses or some of those thought patterns, and we've reframed them and we've broken free. And now we get to walk in that freedom. And so not that again, that there's not significance in doing that post children, you know, even adult children. But if you are thinking preconception, like what a gift to be able to give your kids and yourself to be able to walk through some of that before.
Yeah. There's, it's not preconception, but literally at church, like this past weekend, Becca and Phil, we have mutual friends, that Phil was preaching, and he was talking about, how Becca has been in therapy for a couple of years because it was starting to affect their marriage, so just like past stuff, and didn't get into specifics, but, worked through a lot with a Christian therapist and ended up like, you know, she's not in therapy anymore. She feels fantastic. Like, and through the grace of God, she's, you know, able to connect with her husband even that much more. She decided to, like at one of the first baptism services at our new building, she got baptized, and he showed a picture on the screen of their 5-year-old little boy, Kale, like in the front with both of his hands up, like worshiping. And he was like, he has never done this before in his entire life. He's like, I've been a worship leader his entire life. He has seen this. He's seen his mom do this his entire life. And he has never done it. She's like, but he did it the day that she got baptized. It's like, what spiritual tie was there that, like, you know, I'm saying could have been passed on in utero. Yeah. Like a spiritual tie of, I don't know, but I'm like, what freedom we could give our kids if we process those things beforehand. There's always things to process. We're never completely whole. That's just a part of being human. But that reminded me of the same thing. But
no, I think that's so cool. And I think, and obviously, like, I don't know, always want to preface, because I never want to be misunderstood if I can help it. But just that idea, like, even with that, there is a really, really beautiful way to do that. And then there can be, like, I know people who've gone down some pretty hurtful, damaging roads trying to break free of that. So just like with a practitioner, you still use wisdom and caution, and you still move slowly when it comes to some of those, you know, breaking off some of those things, you know.
Yeah.
But like Aaliyah said, when you feel inside of you something that like shifts or gets frustrated when certain people bring up certain things, like that's your body telling you that there's some trauma there, or there's some past something. There's some roots in the same way there's physical roots, there's spiritual roots that we can dive into. There's, you know, walking through forgiveness and different things, you know, brings a lot of freedom.
Yeah.
So I think that is huge. And then the final piece I would say from a preconception perspective is, and again, Leah has mentioned it so much, is just that educational piece, to really know when you're offered something, like folic acid, do you accept it or not? Like, do you really understand everything that's going in your body? And even if you're working with, a super holistic, crunchy practitioner, like still it's your job to say like, hey, what is this for? Or what are these vitamins? Or what are these nutrients? And not just, there's so many things, just to highlight, folic acid, like people still are like doctors are still highly recommending it. And there's so much science showing how actually damaging it is to the body. And people still have no idea that it's a thing. Like, well, I thought that's just what you did because you don't want, brain deficiencies within your child. I'm like, no. Like but that's not folic acid. Like that is
That's synthetic.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't, like, there's never been proven anything that it does positively within the body. If anything, it actually makes it worse because the body can't process it. So it becomes super toxic. So anyway, just the idea of part of your preconception plan is to, without living in fear, but to sit in a place. You said at the beginning, you didn't say empowered. You said something else. And I wish I could remember.
Strengthen?
Maybe. Yeah. Strength. It was really good. Now I wish I could remember fully what it was.
Rewind. I'm just kidding.
Hold on a second. But yeah, like to be able to just have confidence in moving forward. So those are my thoughts on preconception.
Well, because as I have gone through picking, I don't have an OBGYN through this pregnancy, which a lot of people, which maybe we'll do a podcast on. I don't know. I'll definitely have a YouTube video of like my first trimester and like how I picked my, my midwife and stuff. But being able to, like, we cannot say this enough, being able to take control of your own life.
Yeah.
And then once you start pregnancy, instead of just listening to what people have to say, digging in and doing your own research. Like there's been so much, like, I'm not nervous about anything in pregnancy because I'm a geek and I like deep dive into everything and everything birth and like gestational diabetes and the tests that they make you take that isn't accurate or that has flame retardant. I shouldn't say it. I mean, maybe it's accurate. It's filled with sugar, but it's like literally there's flame retardant in it. And people are just like, oh, the doctor tells me to take it, so I take it. And I'm like, there are alternative options. Like the fresh test where it's just like sugar and lemon. Like take that. Like what do you... Anyways, if you don't learn to...
don't know.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know, but you should like... This is the time to take back the reins on something that you have let go of. And nobody's going to do it for you, and nobody can do it as well as you can for you and your family.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the more we do this and we take that, especially with the idea of preconception, then we get to, again, and we've said this, but just to reiterate it, like it helps us advocate for our kids better. It helps us be able to teach our kids how to advocate, because whether you are homeschooling or putting your kids in school, or like there's going to be times where you may have to fight a doctor on something, or you need help, but how do you get this type of help? And, I always say that the crunchy holistic moms are the kids who seem to have kids who have the most problems. And it's not that they actually have the most problems.
The moms they're aware.
They're aware. It's that they're instead of your child over here on multiple medications with super dark circles under their eyes. And you're just like, that's just what it is. Like my kids come in and I'm like, holy cow, where did those dark circles come from? Like, okay, like I mentally go through that checklist. What do we need? And then can we course correct, Yeah. And so I think that is, again, that aspect of being able to really advocate for them. It goes beyond us, right? Because again, we think this may or may not be that important. I don't have time, and all these things. And like Leah alluded to earlier, like it's not just self-care, it's good stewardship. Yeah. And that's going to, overflow in more than just this one pregnancy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
So get your blood work.
Yeah.
Have a practitioner, a functional medicine doctor, somebody read it.
Yeah.
Look at your environment, not only EMFs, but also like just random toxins in your,
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
hard. I know it's hard. Like I still, my husband and I struggle with the cleaning products. Cause in his mind, if it doesn't smell like a chemical, it's not clean.
Yeah.
And we're working through that. That is a
Yeah.
conversation we have.
I have a good one. I'll recommend you because I think it smells like bleach, but it's not bleach. And so it can,
Okay.
but it's better than nothing.
So it's interesting, but like, so we do have random cleaning products in our house because, he's like, oh, it's not clean if it's not. Anyways, look at your, your toxins around your house. And
Yeah.
that doesn't mean you should go through your house right now and throw away everything because sometimes that's not financially doable. Like it wasn't for us when we kind of started this. It was kind of like, we just finished the products like when they were done. And when you're done, replace them with an alternative or vinegar and water.
I was going to say vinegar and water.
Super cheap. That's what I love, but he hates the smell of vinegar. We still use it. Sorry, bud. But
Add some lemon essential oils or something.
I've started adding yep.
And baking soda, vinegar and water.
Yeah.
Are fantastic.
Yeah. Your environment, EMFs, what was next?
Just overall toxicity, and that includes infections and things, just being aware of that. And then your husband's health or,
health, and then spiritual health.
Yeah.
So those are, actionable things that you can slowly start doing in advance.
Yeah.
Before you take this journey. Cause it is difficult on your body. Like, you're creating something out of nothing. And if you can be the best that you can be during it, all the better.
Yeah. Yeah. If you can enjoy the process,
Yeah.
cause I think that is I hated it. I mean, to the point where I was like, I could have a bazillion children, but I can't go through that again, and it took my body years before I was like, oh, I could now if I, wanted to. But just I remember with both my kids, most specifically with my son, to the point where I was literally like, I don't know what they're going to do because I'm going to pass out. And I can't do this. And what do you do?
During labor?
Yeah. What do you do when he's half out? And I'm like, I'm about to pass out. I'm so tired. And with my daughter, I almost passed out from I think more blood sugar kind of thing. But my blood pressure dropped, it was just,
Were you induced?
With both of them. Yeah. Yep.
Which is a common side effect of
Yeah.
Pitocin is low blood pressure.
Right. Yeah. And again, and this is topic for another day, but I wasn't educated and understood my body, and nor was anyone around me.
No, but it made you this wonderful person now.
Yeah.
You're the one who said, I think, yes, I heard it from you. It's God uses everything. Is that what you said?
Yeah. He doesn't waste anything.
He doesn't waste anything. Thank you. Yeah. I do have a little bit of pregnancy brain, but we're working on it. It's fine.
It's also winter. We're just
winter.
Give me a warm, sunny day for a couple days in a row, and I will be a different person.
Yes. As we're recording this, we're batch recording, and right now daylight savings time is 3 weeks away.
Oh, that's good to know.
And I'm I cannot wait because I'm like a flower. As cheesy as that sounds, I need the sun to come out. Otherwise, I die in the winter.
Yeah.
I'm a dead flower under the snow.
She hibernates.
I hibernate and I'm not myself. And then when it's spring and there's sunshine, even just outside, I am a different human.
Agreed.
Anyways, but God, back to God. He doesn't waste anything. So your experience where
absolutely,
where you said this, I'm not saying this, but that you're I didn't know. It's well, now you're learning things and you're teaching things the next, we're teaching people on YouTube or on this podcast that it doesn't have to be this way. And you're making a difference. We're making a difference for truly the next generation because, that's what who we're talking about right now is the next generation, and they ain't going to be weak.
No,
we're changing that. Isn't it? What's the saying? It's terrible. All the guys say it right now. It's like, weak years or bad years make strong men.
Oh, yeah.
Weak year. I'm gonna leave it. You know what I'm talking about. You have to Google it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
And it's just that cycle, right? And then it's like strong. And then to the point where you go back to weak men.
Yeah.
Because
but it's the same either way of, if you relinquish your bodily autonomy to doctors for 3 generations, people are going to start getting sick of it and start seeing a pattern. And we're just gonna be like, nope, you don't have that anymore. And this is my birth experience or pregnancy or preconception. So,
And so maybe final thought from me, and then if you have any final thoughts, but final thought would be like, regardless of, preconception, fantastic. Like jump on this, like do the work before, because what a beautiful gift to, give your pregnant body as well as, your children. And then regardless of where you're at in the process, like there's always the ability to learn and to take back control.
Maybe we should, start like an Amazon store of like supplement recommendations that people can go and purchase, like a vitamin D, because a lot of people don't know. Like
don't buy your supplements ever on Amazon.
Okay.
Ever.
Don't ever.
We can do like a full script or something.
We'll do something. Well, okay. So then wait a second. I buy my prenatals from Amazon. What are you talking about?
I thought you
I have
bought
them auto
them
ship
from Script.
No,
buy
I have
them
them auto ship from Dr. Axe's Amazon page.
Well,
What are you talking about?
yeah,
Tell me more.
So in general,
But it's from directly his distributor. It's not like Dr. Axe's, like, you know how like you can buy and then it's a sub.
Yeah.
It's directly from
maybe
his
it's
site.
different. I just, in general, there's several people who've come out over the years that would actually test supplements from Amazon, and like often they were not the right thing. Like there is just not, what would the word be? Not compliancy. That's probably the wrong word, but
Potency, the not the right.
there's not as much like if it doesn't work, like if it's not as strong or something, if there's something toxic in it or whatever, oh my word, I'm drawing a blank. There's not as much transparency, accountability, whatever, something like that.
Well, now I have to go reevaluate my life. But
maybe because it's directly from I don't know. Maybe that's changed, but for a long time, it was just very like, it's like, hey, let's not buy from Amazon because of the fact that like, it seemed like for a good chunk of time, like people were buying and then repackaging and reselling, and it wasn't actually the
people
thing. So
do that.
That's different. There are certain things that I like MCT and stuff that I buy food wise on Amazon. It's not a big
Interesting.
deal, but I just always heard a lot of caution of like not buying from supplements from there.
Yeah. So there's like this trend on all the social media. It's like, oh, you can go to like TJ Maxx and buy these high-end products for really cheap and then resell them on Amazon. Whenever you do that, and I do it with with just the one prenatal I have on an auto ship, which is Dr. Axe Ancient Nutrition. But it's directly, you need to look at the store and it says directly who the store is and they host it. Because otherwise that means the distributor would be replacing the pills. And then that's like a whole new can of worms of like, anyways. What were we talking about before? No.
I was
a lot of the time, like, it took a long time for my mom to not buy her supplements from Walmart. She's like, I got vitamin D from Walmart off the shelf. I got like the Walmart brand.
Right.
And I'm like, don't do that. But maybe we'll set up some kind of store or full script. I don't know how that works, but some kind of like recommendation, or we need a whole podcast episode on like then supplements and sourcing and stuff like that.
Yeah. And then I think obviously if you're working with a practitioner, then they will, they can help you. Because again, it's like anything, like vitamin D, like go outside, there's a lot of things where there's just caution. I'm just always cautionary around like whenever you take something like individually, what is that flipping in the body? Like is it helping create balance or is it creating more imbalance? So
Yeah.
just supplement thoughts.
Now go get pregnant. I'm just kidding. Go prep your body.
There you go.
Thanks for being here with us today. We would love to connect with you over on Instagram at underthesun_podcast. Please help us out by subscribing on YouTube, leaving a review on Spotify or Apple Podcast. We'll see you next time. Please remember this information is made available to you for informational and educational purposes only. This is in no way a substitute for medical advice.